She didn't say a word. That's the part people always get wrong when they hear this story. They assume Miriam Tate stormed out, slammed a door, made a scene. That's what they expect from a woman who just had her hand left hanging in the air in front of 11 people. But Miriam Tate didn't slam anything. She picked up her portfolio case, the same worn leather one she'd carried since in her first deal, the one with the broken brass clasp she'd never bothered to fix. And she walked out of that conference room like she had somewhere better to be. She did. Before we get to that room on the 42nd floor, you need to understand where Miriam Tate came from. Because that context matters. And if you've ever been dismissed before you even opened your mouth, you already know why. Miriam grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Cleveland. Her mother, Claudette, worked the overnight shift at a laundry facility for 31 years. Her father, Albert, drove a city bus until his knees gave out. There was no family money, no generational wealth, no connections. What the Tate household had was a dining room table where the bills got sorted on Fridays, and a mother who believed, without reservation, that her daughter was going to do something the family had never done before. Miriam was 12 when she started keeping a notebook. Not a diary, a ledger. She'd write down how much things cost, how much things were worth, why those two numbers were almost never the same. She'd clip articles from the business section of the Plain Dealer, parts her father didn't read, and tape them into the margins. By the time she was compounding interest, better than most adults in her zip code. By the time she graduated from Cleveland State, she'd read every book in the finance section of the downtown library twice. She didn't come from money. She studied it until it stopped being a foreign language. She spent 12 years working at a regional private equity firm in Cincinnati, starting as an analyst, ending as a managing director. Not because anyone handed her anything, because she was, by any honest metric, the best in the room. Her track record was documented. Her returns were real. The numbers didn't care what she looked like. In 2019, Miriam Tate left that firm and started her own, Tate Capital Group. 4 employees, 1 shared office suite, and a quiet, growing portfolio that, by 2024, had crossed $340 million under management. $340 million. She wasn't flashy about it. She drove a used Lexus with a cracked cup holder. She wore the same 4 blazers on rotation. The leather portfolio case with the broken clasp was, as her assistant Priscilla often noted, an embarrassment to the entire operation. Miriam didn't care. She cared about the numbers. In the fall of 2024, a mid-sized pharmaceutical logistics company called Harcourt Distribution was looking for a capital partner. They needed a significant equity injection to fund a warehouse expansion across 4 states. Their CEO was a man named Douglas Witten, 58 years old, 3rd-generation Cincinnati, the kind of man who had his shoes shined every Tuesday and considered punctuality a moral virtue. Witten had built Harcourt from a regional almost national. He was proud of it in the way men of his background are proud of things, loudly, and without much examination of who helped along the way. His board included several old colleagues from his country club days, and one outside director named Foster Greer, who actually knew what he was doing. The deal Miriam's team had structured was clean. She was offering a $120 million equity stake in exchange for a 24% ownership share, with a clear path to liquidity in 5 to 7 years. Her team had spent 6 weeks on due diligence. They knew Harcourt's numbers better than Harcourt's own CFO did. She was brought in through Foster Greer, who had seen Miriam present at a conference in Columbus the previous spring, and quietly flagged her firm to Witten as a serious option. Witten had agreed with the offhand confidence of someone who hadn't yet understood what he was agreeing to. The meeting was set floor of the Prescott Tower. 11 people in the room. Miriam arrived 7 minutes early. She checked in at the front desk, took the elevator up, and waited in a glass-walled reception area that looked out over the city. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, and the broken clasp portfolio case. She was reviewing a page of her own notes when the receptionist came to walk her back. The conference room was the kind that comes with a view designed to make visitors feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table long enough to park a car on, chairs that cost more than most people's first paycheck. The board was already seated when Miriam walked in. Douglas Witten stood at the head of the table. He looked at the receptionist, then back at the receptionist. "Is the rest of her team coming?" he asked. He didn't ask Miriam. He asked the woman standing next to her. Miriam set her portfolio case on the table and extended her hand. "Good morning, Mr. Witten. I'm Miriam Tate." He looked at her hand. There is really no other way to say what happened next. He looked at it the way you look at something that doesn't belong on the table, and then he turned away, turned to the man on his left, nodded at something, and said, "Let's get started, I suppose." 11 people in that room. 3 of them would later say they saw exactly what happened. 2 of them would say they weren't sure. 6 would say they didn't notice anything unusual. That tells you everything about those 6. Miriam's hand came back to her side. Her expression didn't change. If you had walked in 30 seconds later, you would never have known anything had happened at all. She sat down. She opened the broken clasp portfolio case. She was here to do a job. Witten opened the meeting with a 15-minute overview of Harcourt's history that Miriam had already read in the materials his team sent over. She let him finish, asked 2 question receivables that his CFO stumbled slightly answering. Then she presented. Miriam Tate presenting a deal was not like watching most people present a deal. There were no extra slides, no padding, no theatrical graphs designed to distract from weak assumptions. Every number she put on the screen was a number she could defend from 4 different angles. And twice during the presentation, board members started to ask a question, and she'd already put the answer up before they finished the sentence. Foster Greer was watching. He'd seen it before. The rest of the room was catching up. Witten asked 3 questions during her presentation. 2 of them were answered directly in the slide he was looking at. The third was a challenge dressed as a question. Something about whether a firm of her particular size had the operational depth to manage a deal at this level. Miriam looked at him for exactly 1 second before she pulled up a summary of comparable deals her firm had closed in the previous 18 months. "Does that address the concern?" she asked. It did. The meeting ended at 11:40 a.m. Witten shook hands with Foster Greer. He shook hands with 2 other board members. He turned toward the door. Miriam extended her hand again. He walked past her, not accidentally, not in distraction. He stopped, adjusted his cuffs, and walked past her hand like it was furniture. This time, 3 more people saw it. Foster Greer saw it. Miriam picked up the portfolio case. She nodded to Foster Greer across the table. A small, professional nod, nothing more, and she left. In the elevator going down, she pulled out her phone and sent 1 email. 3 sentences, to her associate back at the office. "Pull the Harcourt file. Flag it closed. No deal. I'll explain when I'm back." Then she put her phone away and watched the floor numbers count down. There is something specific about what it feels like to be dismissed before you speak. If you've lived it, you already know. It isn't like anger, exactly. It's more like a door closing on a room you weren't trying to break into. You were invited, you had a key, and someone changed the lock while you were standing there holding it. Miriam had felt that before. The first time was at 24, in a job interview where the hiring manager had clearly not expected her to walk through the door. The second time was at 31, at a firm dinner, where she was asked twice if she was catering. She had learned, over years and over countless rooms, that there were 2 ways to respond to that feeling. You could let it make you loud, or you could let it make you precise. Miriam had chosen precise a long time ago. She got back to the office at 12:15. She sat at her desk, ate the lunch Priscilla had left for her, and spent 40 minutes reviewing 2 other deals that were in progress. She didn't mention the morning to anyone until her weekly partner call the following Tuesday. When she finally told the story, briefly, factually, without performance, her partner, a man named Ellsworth Dunn, who had known Miriam for 11 years, said 4 words. "What do you want to do?" Miriam said, "Nothing. We already did it." What happened next didn't happen because Miriam made calls. She didn't campaign. She didn't talk to journalists. She didn't post anything. She simply closed the file and moved forward. But the room had 11 people in it. and one of them was Foster Greer. Foster Greer was a careful man. He had spent 3 decades in institutional finance, had served on 6 boards, and had a professional reputation he considered worth protecting. He had brought Miriam Tate to that table because he believed in the deal and because he had seen her work. What happened in that conference room, both times, had not escaped him. He didn't call Miriam. He understood she didn't need his call. He called Douglas Witten. That conversation, by all accounts, was short. Foster Greer was not a theatrical man either. He told Witten 2 things. First, that what he had witnessed was something he intended to note formally. Second, that if Harcourt moved forward without Tate Capital and needed to come back to him for board guidance on capital structure, he would be unavailable. Witten pushed back. He used the word misunderstanding 4 times. Foster Greer said, "I was in the room, Douglas," and ended the call. Harcourt Distribution spent the next 4 months pursuing alternative capital partners. The first group they approached made it to term sheet before backing out over concerns about the company's debt-to-equity ratio. Exactly the metric Miriam's team had flagged in due diligence. The second group came in with terms so punitive that Witten's own CFO recommended walking away. The third deal fell through when the partner firm's fund ran into its own regulatory issues. By February, Harcourt's expansion timeline had slept by almost a year. 2 warehouse leases they'd been holding with options lapsed. The cost of re-entering those markets, their logistics director warned, would be significantly higher. Meanwhile, the board had started asking questions. Foster Greer submitted a formal memo in March noting, among other concerns, that the initial capital process had been mishandled and that the firm had passed on what he characterized as a materially superior offer for reasons that were not documented or discussed at the board level. That memo was uncomfortable. It was meant to be. In April, Douglas Witten announced he would be stepping down as CEO to pursue other interests. The board thanked him for his service in a press release that used the words transition and next chapter 3 times between them. He was 58 years old. There was no next chapter anyone could identify. 3 weeks later, Harcourt Distribution announced it had entered into a restructuring process. The expansion was shelved. The company was being evaluated for potential sale. A company that had been, the previous fall, a growth opportunity, now a restructuring story. 1,200 employees across 5 states watching the news. All of it beginning with one extended hand and one man who decided it wasn't worth taking. Miriam Tate found out about the restructuring the same way most people did. She saw the headline on a Thursday morning, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She read the article once, set her phone face down, and finished her coffee. She didn't feel satisfied, exactly. That's the honest version. She felt the specific, quiet weight of watching something preventable happen anyway. She had been in that room. She had seen the numbers. She had known, with the clarity she always trusted, that the deal was good and that the outcome would have been good. Not because of her. Because the fundamentals were sound and the opportunity was real. None of that happened because a man at the head of a table decided in the space of a handshake what kind of person was standing across from him. She thought about her mother, Claudette, sorting bills on Friday nights. She thought about the notebook she'd kept at 12. She thought about 31 years of her father driving a bus so she could sit in that chair, at that table, in that room. She picked her phone back up and texted Priscilla, "Can you push my 9 a.m. to 9:30? I'm going to take a walk." Then she put on her coat, walked out of her house, and went around the block twice in the cold morning air, just because she could. The story of Tate Capital Group didn't make the news. Miriam didn't want it to. She gave one interview that year, to a small trade publication that covered women in private equity, and she talked about fund structure and deal sourcings, and the logistics of building a team. The reporter asked her, near the end, if she'd ever faced significant setbacks in a deal. Miriam thought for a moment. There was one deal that didn't close, she said. The other party wasn't prepared to do business. The reporter moved on to the next question. There's a thing that happens when people tell this kind of story. They want the ending to be louder. They want Miriam on a stage somewhere, accepting an award, and Witten in the audience watching. They want a moment with cameras. Real life doesn't usually work that way. What happened was smaller, and in a certain way, bigger. Tate Capital closed 2 deals that spring, one in healthcare infrastructure, one in commercial real estate, totaling just over $180 million. The firm's assets under management crossed $400 million by the end of the year. Priscilla finally talked Miriam into replacing the portfolio case. She got a new one, dark brown leather. Simple, she kept the old broken one in her desk drawer. She still has it. Foster Greer reached out in June with a referral. A CEO he thought she should meet, a company looking for the right partner. Miriam took the call. The deal was structured and signed by November. Not a word about Harcourt. Not a word needed. Here is what this story is really about, because it isn't only about Miriam. It is about every person who has walked into a room prepared, with the work done, with the numbers right, with everything they were asked to bring, and been made to feel like they were interrupting something. It is about what you do in that moment. You can spend the rest of the day replaying it. You can build a case. You can wait for someone to acknowledge what happened. Or you can pick up your portfolio case, even the one with the broken clasp, and walk back to your office and close the file and keep moving. Miriam Tate did not get her handshake. She also did not spend a single week of her life waiting for Douglas Whitten to understand what he'd lost. He figured it out. They usually do. She was already somewhere else by the time he got there. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever stood in a room where someone looked through you instead of at you, you know the choice that comes after. What you do with it is the whole story. Miriam knew what to do with it. She always had.